Pope Leo XIV, Cardinal Prevost Progressive Conservative. Pope Leo XIV, formerly Cardinal Robert Prevost, will steer the Church toward reform or retrenchment. Prevost is widely seen as continuing Pope Francis's agenda. He was reportedly chosen by the cardinals committed to Pope Francis' reform agenda and described by friends as a firm supporter of his predecessor's papacy, and especially of the late pontiff's commitment to social justice issues. Yet some past remarks, for example criticizing the homosexual lifestyle and alternative families in 2012, suggest he is more traditional on moral questions. Below we examine his known positions on church governance, social issues, women's roles, and justice, drawing on his public statements and expert commentary to assess where he falls on the progressive, conservative spectrum. Church governance and reforms. On governance, Prevost has firmly aligned with Francis's emphasis on synodality and decentralization. As prefect of the dicastery for bishops, he encouraged a more inclusive process of choosing bishops. He spoke of making the selection process more synodal by involving laypeople, priests, and religious in greater numbers. For example, he told journalists in 2024 that the people of God should have input in episcopal appointments, emphasizing that nuncios must get in touch with parish groups and listen to their concerns when vetting candidates. Vatican News notes that Prevost urged not only teaching doctrine but communicating the beauty and joy of knowing Jesus as bishop's first duty, echoing Francis's pastoral style. National Catholic Reporter observes that by selecting Prevost, the cardinals sought someone who shared Francis's commitment to synodality and focus on the world's poor, yet with a steadier hand at the wheel of governance. Prevost himself often speaks of bishops as pastors, not bureaucrats, and in interviews he has said a bishop must be close to the members of the community, without excluding anyone. Analysts stress that Prevost is regarded as an experienced curia insider but not a creature of that curia, able to balance Vatican management with missionary simplicity. Vatican correspondent Christopher White notes his reputation for diligence in vetting bishops and handling problem cases, suggesting a pragmatic, competent style. Religious scholar Andrea Riccardi cautions that the labels progressive and conservative may no longer map neatly onto these governance debates. The key issue is whether Prevost continues Francis's reform path or shifts toward institutional stability. Most reports say he was chosen to maintain the reforms begun under Francis. As one Vatican insider put it, Prevost's election signaled that the cardinals have chosen someone committed to the reforms Pope Francis began. Social issues, LGBTQ+ inclusion and marriage. On hot-button social issues, Prevost's record is mixed. Publicly, he has stressed pastoral care, but his few known comments on LGBTQ matters have drawn scrutiny. In 2012, he criticized Western media sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel, explicitly mentioning the homosexual lifestyle and alternative families comprised of same-sex partners. This statement, cited by the New York Times and reported by media outlets like Pink News, aligns with a more traditional outlook on sexuality. By contrast, Pope Francis has famously asked, "Who am I to judge?" regarding gay Catholics, so Prevost's 2012 comments suggest he is less personally liberal on this topic than Francis. That said, there is no record of Prevost actively campaigning against any of Francis's initiatives. In 2023, the Vatican released Fiducia Supplicans, a guideline allowing non-liturgical blessings for couples in various irregular situations. Prevost did not publicly oppose this document. Instead, he merely noted that bishops' conferences should interpret it according to local circumstances, neither fully endorsing nor rejecting it. According to media accounts, he showed only mild support for Francis's practice of permitting priests to bless same-sex unions. In short, he has not sought to roll back Francis's actions on same-sex blessings, but neither has he spoken warmly in favor of them. On divorce and remarriage, Prevost appears more aligned with Francis's pastoral approach. Catholic News reports state that Prevost supported Francis's change to allow divorced and civilly remarried Catholics, without an annulment, to receive communion in certain cases. This reform was contentious among conservative prelates, but Prevost evidently accepted it. Thus, on questions of marriage and family, he seems willing to implement Francis's pastoral accommodations. In balance, most expert commentary portrays Prevost as a moderate on social issues, not a crusader for change in doctrine, but a pastor open to mercy. One Vatican insider noted that Prevost is seen as a dignified middle-of-the-road candidate who would likely continue Francis's strategy of caring for marginalized people without adopting any new doctrinal shifts. Role of women in the Church. Prevost has expressed traditional views on clerical roles for women, reflecting the current apostolic teaching. At the October 2023 Synod on Synodality, he responded to questions about women's leadership by underlining the apostolic tradition, meaning, in context, the ban on women's ordination to the priesthood. He said that simply ordinating women or clericalizing women per se doesn't necessarily solve a problem, it might make a new problem. In other words, Prevost does not support a quick break with the 2,000-year tradition of a male priesthood. At the same time, he acknowledged that the Church needs a new understanding of leadership, power, authority, and service, above all service, in the Church that includes women's gifts. This echoes Pope Francis's own approach, recognizing women's crucial perspective and emphasizing service, but not altering sacramental orders. In sum, Prevost takes a centrist position on women's roles. He firmly rejects women's ordination, in line with both Francis and his predecessors. Yet he affirms the value of women's perspectives in church life. As he put it, while women can hold many leadership roles in society, there is not an immediate parallel in the church without deeper discernment. Theologians note this is a cautious stance. He is not pushing for radical reform, but he seems aware that listening to women may require broadening how authority is understood. No source suggests Prevost will restrict the involvement of women. On the contrary, experts say he embraces Francis's synodal emphasis on listening, which by its nature includes women religious and lay leaders. Economic and environmental justice. Prevost is strongly aligned with Pope Francis on economic and environmental justice, fully endorsing Laudato Si and the Church's preferential option for the poor. In Vatican News coverage of a 2024 climate seminar, Cardinal Prevost warned that climate change impacts the poorest nations and stressed it is time to move from words to action, grounding solutions in Catholic social teaching. He explicitly quoted Laudato Si themes, for example, that humanity's dominion over nature should not become tyrannical, but a relationship of reciprocity with creation. These remarks make clear that he sees environmental care as a moral imperative, echoing Francis's legacy. Similarly, his comments and background indicate a focus on poverty and justice. Having spent decades in Peru, Prevost has witnessed acute poverty firsthand. An NCR profile notes that both he and Francis were formed by Latin American bishops, who embraced the poor as a key concern. In Chilean Synod discussions, Prevost stressed listening to the Holy Spirit and the spirit of truth-seeking in the Church, a phrase that aligns with the idea that social teaching must lead concrete action. Friends describe him as a voice of common sense and practical concerns for the Church's outreach to the poor. No evidence suggests he favors trickle-down economics or rejects Francis's criticism of inequality. Rather, his record suggests he will continue advocating for migrants, the marginalized, and ecological responsibility. In short, on justice issues Prevost comes across as decidedly progressive. He champions environmental stewardship and economic solidarity. Even conservative critics would not find him business-friendly. One NCR columnist quipped that conservative critics of Francis will be disappointed. The new pope is not someone who will be seduced by financial power. This reputation, of putting the poor and planet first, is one area where analysts say Prevost very much walks in Francis's footsteps. Comparison with Pope Francis. Overall, commentators emphasize that Prevost is closer to Francis than to his critics. Both share a missionary background and a pastoral approach shaped by Latin America. Winters, in the National Catholic Reporter, notes that Prevost and Francis were both influenced by Vatican II's legacy in the region, a synodal style and option for the poor. A Canadian news report quoting a longtime friend says Prevost was always friendly and warm, and upheld Francis's focus on social justice. Likewise, Vatican insiders saw Prevost as a candidate for those seeking a curial insider, who nonetheless prioritizes what Francis did. In short, he was viewed as a Francis continuity candidate chosen to preserve the inclusive, open church path. Where Prevost differs from Pope Francis is mainly in degree rather than kind. On issues like women's ordination or LGBT blessings, both men uphold current church teachings. But Francis is perceived as more freewheeling in tone and more likely to hint at possible changes. Prevost is more reticent. For example, Francis has allowed the blessing of same-sex couples and often adopts welcoming language, whereas Prevost, when pressed, offered only qualified or cautionary comments on those issues. In contrast, on governance and justice they seem aligned. Both favor decentralization and have prioritized environmental care. Some analysts call Prevost mild-mannered and steadier than Francis, suggesting he might implement reforms more predictably. In sum, Pope Leo XIV's agenda is expected to be parallel to Francis's rather than a sharp turn. As one Vatican observer put it, cardinals wanted someone who shared Francis's commitment to synodality and focus on the world's poor. The major difference is that conservative voices who chafed under Francis hoped Prevost might pivot to the right, but reports indicate they will be disappointed. For now, priests and laities groups, like Catholic Sisters, have expressed hope that the synodal walking together process will continue under the new pope, reflecting an expectation of continuity. Public statements and ideological profile. Prevost himself has given remarkably few public interviews, so we pieced together his leanings from formal remarks. In his 2023 Vatican News interview, he declared that in selecting bishops the Church risks forgetting that our first duty is to communicate the beauty and joy of knowing Jesus, if it focuses only on doctrine. This pastoral emphasis mirrors Francis's style. In October 2024 he urged synod delegates to make bishop appointments more synodal by involving lay Catholics, priests, and religious, another hallmark of Francis's vision. During the synod he answered journalists candidly, reaffirming adherence to the apostolic tradition on women's ordination, while calling for new models of service in church leadership. Analysts thus portray Prevost's public posture as one of continuity with Francis. Vatican reporter Christopher White notes Prevost's vocal advocacy of synodality and inclusive structures as key to healing polarization. The College of Cardinals report, an analysis site, similarly observes that Prevost is very close to Francis' vision regarding the environment, outreach to the poor and migrants. At the same time, secular commentators have flagged his past statements. For example, the New York Times noted his 2012 critique of media sympathy for gay families. The LGBT media outlet Pink News summed this up bluntly. New Pope Robert Prevost has expressed anti-LGBTQ+ views in the past. Church insiders, however, stress that Prevost's record is relatively moderate. A friend told Reuters that Prevost remained a voice of common sense and practical concerns on issues of poverty and justice. Cardinal comrades who have worked with him describe him as quietly effective and well-regarded for listening. As one Vatican expert noted, cardinals saw in Prevost no surprises, a careful manager rather than an ideologue. Even his cautious remarks on hot-button issues do not necessarily predict dramatic action. For instance, his warning that women's ordination might make a new problem is essentially a restatement of current church teaching, not an activist defense of it. In the end, The consensus among observers is that Pope Leo XIV will be a continuation of Francis's legacy in governance and social outreach, with no radical departure on moral questions. As Michael Winters of NCA put it, "We know the Cardinals have chosen someone committed to the reforms Pope Francis began." Prevost's election has been interpreted as a mandate to keep walking together with all Catholics, especially the poor and marginalized, rather than to pull the Church sharply to the right. He thus appears progressive in terms of style and priorities, synodality, outreach, ecology, while staying conservative in upholding existing doctrine on marriage and e-donation. How exactly he will balance these emphases remains to be seen, but for now experts emphasize that Pope Leo XIV's direction is broadly in line with Francis's pastoral vision. Sources: news coverage, Catholic press, and analyst commentary on Cardinal Prevost's positions and statements.